At 65 years old, I stood on a beautiful, sun-drenched lawn in Los Angeles, ready to marry a good, kind man. As he leaned in to give me the kiss that would seal our new life together, something wet and heavy struck me in the chest, spattering across my cream-colored wedding dress. I looked down and saw a raw, bloody pig's heart staining the delicate lace. And when I looked up, my scream catching in my throat, I saw him standing at the edge of the garden, a hateful, predatory smile on his face. It was the face of the monster I had run 3,000 miles to escape, my ex-husband. I want to start by giving a special shout out to my wonderful and loyal subscribers who are always with me in the comments. Today's shout out goes to Brenda from Chicago, Sharon from Georgia, and also to Michael, Patricia, and James. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for being here with me. But before the nightmare returned, there was the most beautiful, perfect, and peaceful morning of my life, the morning of my second chance. The California sun was a gentle warmth on my skin as I sat on the patio of the small bungalow I now called home. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh-cut grass. In New York, my mornings had been filled with the sounds of traffic and the cold, oppressive silence of a dead marriage. Here, my mornings were filled with birdsong and the easy, rumbling laughter of the man who was about to become my husband. "You're doing it again," Rob said, his voice a warm, gentle tease. He sat across from me at the small bistro table, a coffee cup cradled in his large, capable hands, staring off into the middle distance with that little smile on your face. "A penny for your thoughts, soon to be Mrs. Matthews." Robert Matthews, a retired LAPD detective, a man as solid and as steady as the old oak tree in our yard. I had met him 2 years ago at a community gardening class. He was kind, he was funny, and he had the calmest eyes I had ever seen. He was everything my ex-husband Marcus was not. Rob was safety. Marcus had been a storm that had raged for 38 years of my life. "I was just thinking," I said, my heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it almost hurt, "that I am the luckiest woman in the world." He reached across the table and took my hand. "No, Whitney," he said, his gaze serious and loving. "Luck has nothing to do with it. You earned this. You fought for this peace. I'm just the man who gets the privilege of sharing it with you." He was right. I had fought for it. After the divorce, I learned that the end of a marriage is not always the end of a war. Marcus had not been content to let me go. My freedom was an insult to his control. The marriage had been a prison, a 38-year exercise in psychological torment where he had systematically chipped away at my self-worth until I was a shell, a ghost in my own home. I was living with Stockholm Syndrome, mistaking the moments he wasn't being cruel for moments of kindness. The divorce was supposed to be the end. But for him, it was just a new beginning. The harassment was relentless. He would follow me, his car a constant, menacing presence in my rearview mirror. He keyed my car from bumper to bumper. He called my new job, telling my boss lies. The final soul-crushing straw was when I came home from a weekend away to find that he had smeared the front door of my apartment with feces, a vile public declaration of his hatred. That was when I knew I had to run. Not just move across town, but disappear. I sold everything I owned, everything he hadn't already taken in the divorce. I said painful, tearful goodbyes to my few remaining friends, the ones he hadn't managed to alienate, and I fled. I fled New York, the city of my birth, the city that held all my memories, and I ran toward the sun, toward a place where he would never think to look for me. For 3 years in Los Angeles, I had built a new life, brick by fragile brick. I reclaimed the woman he had tried to destroy. I started painting again, a passion I had given up decades ago. I learned to laugh again, to trust again, and then I met Rob. And for the first time in my life, I learned what it felt like to be loved by a partner, not possessed by an owner. Our wedding was to be a small, quiet affair in our own backyard. I didn't invite anyone from my old life, not even my closest cousins. The risk of him finding out my location, my new name, was too great. It was just us. A handful of Rob's old police buddies and the celebrant. It was all I needed. Later that morning, as I stood before the mirror in my simple, elegant wedding dress, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were bright, not dulled by fear. Her shoulders were back, not hunched in anticipation of the next cutting remark. Her smile was real. At 65, I was finally beautiful because for the first time I was finally free. I placed a hand on my heart, feeling its steady, peaceful rhythm. "Thank you," I whispered to the universe. To God, to whatever force had guided me here, the monster was gone. The ghosts were buried. Today was the first day of the rest of my safe and peaceful life. The wedding ceremony was a beautiful, sun-drenched dream. We stood under a simple archway woven with white jasmine and climbing roses in our own backyard. Rob's voice, as he recited his vows, was the steadiest, most reassuring sound I'd ever heard. He spoke of respect, of partnership, of a future built on a foundation of trust and laughter. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart, my voice trembling with an emotion I had never known in my first 38 years of marriage, pure, unadulterated joy. I was not just marrying a man, I was marrying a life of peace, a life I had fought so hard to claim. Our small audience of friends, mostly Rob's old colleagues from the force and their wives, beamed at us. They were good people who had welcomed me into their circle without question, who only knew me as the happy, vibrant woman Rob had fallen in love with. They knew nothing of the terrified ghost I had been in New York, and for that I was eternally grateful. "And now," the celebrant said, her voice warm and smiling, "by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Rob, you may kiss your bride." The world seemed to slow down. Rob turned to me, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. He was smiling a smile that was just for me, a smile that promised safety and devotion. This was it. The moment that sealed my new life, the moment that banished the last of the old ghosts forever. He leaned in, his hands gently cupping my face. And that's when it happened. A sudden, wet, heavy impact against my chest. A sound like a slab of meat hitting a butcher's block. A spray of something cold and sticky spattered across my face and Rob's cheek. A collective gasp went through our guests. The celebrant's jaw dropped. Rob, his police instincts kicking in, immediately pulled back, his body shielding mine as his eyes scanned the yard, looking for the source of the assault. But I was frozen, looking down at my dress. There, clinging to the delicate cream-colored lace right over my heart, was a raw, bloody pig's heart. It was a grotesque, obscene violation, a symbol of such primal hatred that it stole the air from my lungs. The beautiful, sacred moment was shattered, replaced by a scene from a horror movie. "What in God's name?" Rob began, his voice a low growl of disbelief and rage, but I knew. Oh Lord, I knew. A cold, familiar dread, a terror I had prayed I would never feel again, washed over me, eclipsing the California sun. My head slowly turned, my eyes drawn with a sickening magnetic pull toward the edge of the property, toward the thick hedge of bougainvillea that separated our yard from the street. And there he was. Marcus, my ex-husband. He was standing there, partially obscured by the bright pink flowers, but there was no mistaking him. He hadn't aged well. His face was puffy, his eyes filled with a venomous, triumphant hatred that burned across the 50 feet that separated us. He was wearing a filthy, stained tracksuit, a caricature of the powerful, well-dressed man he had once been, but the smile on his face, that was the same. It was the same predatory, self-satisfied smile he'd worn every time he had managed to break a piece of my spirit. He had found me. After all my running, after all my careful planning, the monster had found me. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but to slowly, deliberately wipe a speck of blood from his cheek. Then his smile widened, and he was gone, melting back into the shadows of the street. The chaos that erupted around me was a distant, muffled noise. Rob was barking orders, his old friends were securing the perimeter, someone was calling 911, but I was trapped in the silent, screaming terror of my own mind. He had found me. It wasn't just a random act of vandalism, it was a message. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how far I ran, no matter what new life I tried to build, I would never, ever be free of him. My beautiful, perfect wedding day, the symbol of my final escape, had just become the announcement that the hunt had begun all over again. The moments immediately after Marcus vanished were a blur of organized chaos. The beautiful, dreamlike wedding collapsed into the sharp, procedural reality of a crime scene. Rob, my new husband, transformed before my eyes. The gentle, smiling man I had just married was gone, replaced by the retired LAPD detective he had been for 30 years. His voice became a low, commanding bark, cutting through the panicked whispers of our guests. "Nobody leaves the property," he ordered, his hand instinctively going to his hip, where a service weapon no longer rested. "Frank, Bill, secure the front and back. Don't let anyone in or out. Don't touch anything he might have touched." We preserved the scene. His friends, his old squad mates, moved with a grim, practiced efficiency. They were no longer wedding guests in ill-fitting suits. They were a unit, securing a perimeter, managing the witnesses. The surrealism of the moment was overwhelming. My uncut wedding cake sat on a table next to a retired sergeant who was already taking preliminary statements. The celebrant, her face pale with shock, was being gently questioned by another. I was still standing by the altar, the cooling blood of the pig's heart soaking into my dress, a prisoner in the wreckage of my own happiness. The arrival of the uniformed LAPD officers made it official. My wedding, my sacred day of peace, was now an active investigation. They were professional and as gentle as they could be, but the questions were brutal. I had to sit in my own living room, the scent of jasmine from the trampled garden still hanging in the air, and recount the entire sordid history of my life with Marcus. I had to speak of the abuse, the divorce, the stalking, the vandalism. Each word was a betrayal of the new life I had tried to build, a confession that my past was not just a memory, but a relentless hunter that had finally tracked me down. Rob sat beside me the whole time, his hand a warm, solid presence on my back. But I could feel the coiled tension in him, the frustration of a man used to being in charge who was now forced to be a civilian, a victim. He knew as a former cop the grim reality of the situation. A restraining order was a piece of paper. The police could file a report. They could put out a warrant for vandalism and trespassing, but they couldn't find a man who wanted to stay hidden. Not until he decided to strike again. When the last of the police cars had finally pulled away, a profound and heavy silence fell over the house. The guests were long gone. The caterers had packed up the uneaten food. The beautiful floral arrangements now seemed like funeral wreaths. My wedding dress, stained and ruined, had been taken away in an evidence bag. I stood in the middle of my living room in a borrowed bathrobe, a ghost at my own wedding feast. The shame and guilt were a suffocating weight. I had done this. I had brought this darkness, this violence into Rob's peaceful, orderly life. I had turned his home into a crime scene and his friends into a security detail. He had married a woman and inherited a monster. "Rob," I said, my voice a broken whisper, "I'm so sorry." He came to me then and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a fierce, protective embrace. "Don't you dare be sorry," he said, his voice a low growl of pure rage. "You have nothing to be sorry for. The only one who should be sorry is him, and I promise you he will be." "I should go," I choked out, the words tasting like poison. "I can't let him do this to you. I ran once, I can run again. I can disappear." He pulled back, his hands gripping my shoulders, and made me look at him. The gentle warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hard steel gray resolve. "Listen to me, Whitney," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your running is over. The day you met me, your past became my past. The day you married me, your enemy became my enemy. We are a team. We don't run. We stand our ground and we fight. This is our home. And no one," he said, his jaw tight with fury, "is ever going to make you feel unsafe in your own home again." He led me to the sofa and sat me down, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. He then walked over to the phone, his movements filled with a new and terrifying purpose. He wasn't calling the police. He was calling in the old debts, the old favors, the brotherhood that never truly retires. I heard him on the phone, his voice low and hard, the voice of a detective activating his network. "Eddie, it's Rob. Yeah, I'm fine. Listen, I need a favor, a big one. I need you to run a full deep dive workup on a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne. Last known is an apartment in Queens, New York, but he's here. He's in my city. I want everything. Credit card pings, flight manifests, car rentals, burner phones. I want to know where he's sleeping, what he's eating, and who he's talking to. Light him up like a damn Christmas tree. I want to find this son of a bitch before he even thinks about finding us again." He hung up the phone and turned to me. As I looked at the grim, determined set of his face, a flicker of something new sparked to life through the thick fog of my fear. For 38 years of my life, I had been the prey. I had been the one who ran, the one who hid. But now, for the first time in my life, I was married to the hunter. And the hunt was on. The days that followed our ruined wedding were a blur of construction and quiet vigilance. The beautiful open bungalow that I had so lovingly curated as a sanctuary of peace was transformed piece by piece into a fortress. Rob, with the grim efficiency of a man who had spent his life dealing with the worst of humanity, oversaw everything. A state-of-the-art security system was installed, with cameras covering every angle of the property. New, reinforced locks were fitted on every door and window. Motion sensor floodlights were placed in the garden, turning the night into an artificial, shadowless day. I worked alongside him, not as a frightened victim, but as a partner. I helped program the security codes and learned the camera system. Each new measure, each new barrier we erected between us and the outside world was a small act of defiance. It was a declaration that we would not be terrorized into abandoning our home. We were not running anymore. We were building a wall. In the quiet hours, the fear still found its way through the cracks. A car backfiring down the street would make my heart leap into my throat. The rustle of a possum in the jasmine bushes at night would make me sit bolt upright in bed. The ghosts of my past were relentless, but this time I was not alone in the dark. Rob's presence was a steady, calming anchor. He never dismissed my fears, but he met them with logic and a professional calm that was more comforting than any hollow reassurance. He was teaching me to replace my panic with his preparedness. Meanwhile, his network was at work. His friend Eddie, a tech genius who had once worked in the LAPD's cyber crimes unit, began to pull on the threads Marcus had left behind. The picture that emerged was of a man who was both cunning and unraveling. Marcus hadn't flown into LAX. He had flown into Las Vegas a week before the wedding, paying cash for a one-way ticket. He'd rented a cheap sedan, again, with a huge cash deposit. He'd driven to Los Angeles and had been motel hopping in the San Fernando Valley, living off the grid in places that catered to people who didn't want to be found. He was careful, methodical, covering his tracks like a professional. But he had made one mistake. In his arrogance, he had used a credit card. One Rob's friend was able to track at a small independent butcher shop in East LA the morning of our wedding. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in my terror, that he had gotten sloppy for a moment. It was a small crack in his armor, but it was a start. It gave us a geographical anchor point. "He's smart," Rob said one evening, as we looked at a map of the city dotted with the few locations we had on him. "He's not behaving like a typical domestic harasser. This is planned. It's more theatrical. The pig's heart? It's a performance." He was right. And as I looked at the map, something inside me shifted. For 38 years, I had been the object of Marcus's cruelty. I had spent my life reacting to him, trying to anticipate his moods, to avoid his rage. I had never tried to truly understand the twisted machinery of his mind, but now I was not his victim. I was his analyst. "It's symbolism, Rob," I said, a sudden chilling clarity cutting through my fear. It was always symbolism. When he keyed my car, he didn't just scratch it. He carved the word "used" into the driver's side door. When he vandalized my apartment, he used a specific brand of cheap beer that I hated to write the word "trash" on the wall. He's telling a story about what he thinks I am. I thought about the pig's heart. "He used to have this saying," I whispered, the memory making my skin crawl. "When he thought someone was being disloyal in his business dealings, he'd say they had the heart of a pig." Rob looked at me, his detective's eyes sharp and focused. He wasn't just looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at his star witness, his expert profiler. I was the world's foremost authority on the psychosis of Marcus Thorne. I was the one who could translate the language of his madness. This new role was empowering. The pain of my past was no longer just a source of trauma. It was a source of intelligence. It was a weapon. "He's escalating," I said, looking at the map. The attack at the wedding wasn't the end game. It was the opening statement. It was a message for me, but the next move, it won't be for me. He'll see me as your weakness, and he'll try to hurt you by taking something from you. He's a hunter, Rob. He'll want to wound his rival and show that you can't protect your own. The blood drained from Rob's face. Our wedding had been small, but we had placed a simple, joyful announcement in the local paper a week before. It had mentioned my name, and it had mentioned his. It also mentioned his beloved daughter, Chloe, who had been my maid of honor. Rob was across the room in a second, his phone in his hand, his movements swift and urgent. He punched in a number. Eddie, it's me, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Scrap the financial tracking for a minute. I need a real-time GPS location on my daughter's car, a blue Prius license plate, and I want a patrol car at her apartment on Ventura. Right now. Tell them to consider it a priority welfare check. He hung up and looked at me, his face a mask of cold fury and dawning terror. The monster wasn't just hunting me anymore. He had expanded his territory. He was hunting my new family. And standing there in the cold, bright light of our fortified home, we had no idea if we were already too late. The minutes that followed Rob's phone call were the longest of my life. The air in our newly fortified living room was thick and heavy. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a hammer blow against the taut silence. We sat side by side on the sofa, not speaking, our eyes fixed on the phone sitting on the coffee table. Every car that passed on the street outside was him. Every shadow that moved in the garden was him. He was everywhere and nowhere, a monster made of fear and memory. The guilt I felt was a physical sickness, a cold, coiling serpent in my gut. My past, a toxic sludge I thought I had contained, was now leaking into this good man's life, threatening to poison the one person he cherished most in the world. When the phone finally rang, its shrill, electronic chirp made both of us jump. Rob snatched it up before the second ring. Yeah, he barked, his voice tight. What do you have? He listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. I watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped the phone. A long, agonizing silence stretched on. Then a slow, deep breath escaped his lungs. The tension in his shoulders eased just a fraction. Okay, he said, his voice low. Is she with the unit now? Good. Get her here. Now. He hung up and turned to me. Chloe's safe, he said, the relief in his voice a raw, ragged thing. The patrol car got to her apartment complex just as Marcus was trying to jimmy the lock on the door to the underground parking garage. He saw the cruiser's lights and took off on foot. He's in the wind, but he was there. You were right, Whitney. He was there for her. The wave of relief was so powerful it left me weak, but it was followed by the cold confirmation of our worst fears. Marcus had escalated from psychological torment to active predatory hunting. He was no longer just my monster. He was a direct threat to Rob's family. An hour later, Chloe was with us. She was a bright, beautiful young woman in her late 20s with her father's kind eyes and a spirit I'd come to adore. But now, her eyes were wide with a terror she was trying her best to hide, her body trembling as her father wrapped her in a fierce, protective hug. Our home, our fortress, had now become a safe house. The dynamic in the house shifted. It was no longer just the two of us against him. We now had an innocent life to protect, a constant living reminder of the stakes. The police had a warrant out for his arrest for attempted breaking and entering, a much more serious charge, but we all knew the reality. Marcus had been living like a ghost for weeks. He wouldn't be caught in a routine traffic stop. He was too smart, too careful. That evening, the three of us sat in the living room, the security monitors casting a cool blue glow on our faces. We were prisoners in our own safe house, waiting for the monster to make his next move. We can't keep living like this, Rob said, his voice a low growl of frustration, waiting for him to slip up. We have to force his hand. We have to flush him out. How? Chloe asked, her voice small. He knows you're a cop. He knows we're on high alert. He'll just wait. No, He won't, I said, the words coming to me with a sudden chilling certainty. All eyes turned to me. He won't wait because his ego won't let him. This isn't just about terrorizing me anymore. This is a competition now. It's about him proving that he's smarter than Rob, that he can still get to me, that he still owns me. I looked at Rob. He thinks I'm your weakness. But he's wrong. I'm our weapon. We can't catch him if he's hiding. So we have to make him come out into the open. We have to set a trap. The plan we devised was terrifying in its simplicity. We would use Marcus's obsession, his towering pathological ego, against him. I had to show him that I was not afraid, that my life was continuing, that his grand, dramatic act of terror at our wedding had failed to break me. I had to taunt him with my happiness, with my survival. He would not be able to resist the urge to shatter it. There was a local news segment scheduled to film the next afternoon at the community garden where Rob and I had met, highlighting a recent beautification project. I had been asked weeks ago to say a few words. I had planned to decline, but now it was the perfect stage. The next day, I stood in front of a television camera, the California sun warm on my face. I wore a bright, cheerful yellow sundress. I smiled. I laughed. I spoke with passion and excitement about the new rose bushes and the joy the garden brought to the community. To the outside world, I was the picture of a happy, resilient 65-year-old newlywed, a woman who was thriving in her new life. It was the performance of a lifetime, and every word was a piece of bait. I knew he would be watching. Somewhere out there, in a dark and lonely motel room, he would see me, and his hatred would boil over. Rob and his team of retired cops, all trusted friends, were hidden out of sight, in unmarked cars, monitoring the perimeter. We were casting a line, hoping a monster would bite. That night, we watched the segment air on the 10 o'clock news. There I was, smiling, the image of everything he had lost and everything he was determined to destroy. The trap was set. The bait was perfect. And somewhere in the sprawling darkness of the city, the monster was watching, and we could only pray that he was angry enough to come and take it. The 2 days that followed the news broadcast were the longest of my life. Our home, our fortress, became a pressure cooker of silent, waiting tension. Every time a car slowed down on our street, every time the mail carrier walked up the path, my heart would leap into my throat. Chloe, Rob, and I moved through the house like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones, our ears constantly attuned to the sounds of the outside world. I was the bait, and the waiting was a unique form of psychological torture, a test of the very resilience I had tried to project to the world. I tried to be strong for Chloe, to act as if this were all a procedural matter that her father had under control. But at night, the old fears would return, whispering to me in the dark. I would dream of Marcus, of his hateful smile, of the endless, subtle ways he had made me feel small and worthless for 38 years. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and Rob would be there. A warm, solid presence in the dark, his hand finding mine, pulling me back from the edge. On the third morning it came. Not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of a delivery truck door. A courier left a simple brown cardboard box on our doorstep. Rob was on it in an instant. "Don't touch it," he ordered, his voice sharp. He slipped on a pair of leather gloves from a kit he kept by the door and carefully brought the package inside. He placed it on the kitchen table, his movements precise and economical, just as I imagined he had done 1,000 times in his old life. He examined the seals, the postmark, the label. There was no return address. With a small knife, he carefully slit the tape and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a collection of old photographs from my life with him, from our wedding, from holidays, from the births of our children. Children he now refused to even speak to. But in every single photo, my face, my eyes had been violently scratched out with a thick black marker, leaving a horrific, empty void where my identity used to be. He was trying to erase me. Beneath the desecrated photos was a single white note card. On it, in Marcus's familiar, arrogant scrawl, were 7 words. "You look so happy in your garden. Weeds must be pulled." It was a declaration of war. A direct response to my performance on the news. He had not only seen me, but he was also letting us know that he was watching, that he had accepted my challenge. Rob carefully placed the photos and the note into evidence bags. The package was a mistake, a product of his monumental ego. It was postmarked from a distribution center in Van Nuys, and it would give Eddie and the police a new, much smaller geographical area to focus their search. The net was tightening. But for me, the package had a different, unexpected effect. Marcus had sent it to terrorize me, to remind me that he could still reach me, to throw me back into the state of fear he had cultivated for decades. But as I looked at the hateful, pathetic defacement of those old photos, I felt no fear. The woman in those pictures, the timid, frightened woman with the sad, haunted eyes, I was not her anymore. He couldn't hurt her. She was a ghost, a memory. The person he was hunting no longer existed. All that was left was a cold, hard anger and a profound, pitying disgust for the broken, hateful man he had become. "He thinks I'm still the same woman," I said to Rob, my voice clear and steady. "The one who would cry and hide. He has no idea who I am now." I looked my husband in the eyes. "Let's finish this." The new evidence from the package allowed Eddie to work his magic. He cross-referenced security footage from the courier drop-off point with a list of cheap, cash-only motels in the Van Nuys area. After 2 days of painstaking work, they found him. A grainy image of a man matching Marcus's description, paying for a room in cash at a rundown motel called the Starlight Inn. They had his location. The final trap was set. We couldn't risk a direct assault on the motel. He was too unpredictable, and he could have a hostage or simply disappear again. We had to draw him out to a place where we could control the environment. The community garden. It was the place I had publicly claimed as my sanctuary. For his ego, for his obsession with symbolism, it was the only place he could stage his final act of triumphant destruction. The plan was simple. Rob's friends on the force would let it be known through a confidential informant, a source Marcus might be using for information, that I was going to be at the garden the next evening, alone, for a small, private volunteer appreciation dinner. The next day, as the sun began to set, I got ready. I didn't put on a dress of mourning. I put on the same bright, cheerful yellow sundress I had worn for the television interview. It was an act of pure, undiluted defiance. Before I left, Rob held me close. He was no longer just my husband. He was my partner, my commanding officer in this 2-person army. He slipped a small, smooth device into my hand. "It's a panic button," he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. "The moment you see him, the second you feel anything is wrong, you press it. We'll be everywhere. I'll be listening to you the whole time." I got in my car and drove. When I pulled up to the community garden, it looked just as it always did. Peaceful, beautiful, a small oasis in the middle of the city. But I knew that looks were deceiving. I knew that on the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, in unmarked vans parked down the street and hidden among the shadows, Rob, his team, and a dozen LAPD officers were watching, waiting. I took a deep breath, the scent of roses filling my lungs. I got out of the car and walked toward the garden gate, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum. I was no longer the bait. I was the hunter, calmly walking into the center of my own trap, and I prayed to God that the monster was hungry. The community garden at dusk was a place of deep, conflicting beauty. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple, and the air was heavy with the sweet, drowsy scent of night-blooming jasmine. It was a picture of perfect peace, but it was a lie. For me, every shadow was a hiding place. Every rustle of leaves in the evening breeze was the sound of an approaching footstep. I was a solitary figure in a beautiful, sprawling trap, and the waiting was the hardest part. I carried a small wicker basket and a pair of garden shears, playing the part of the dedicated volunteer. I walked to the rose bushes that had been the backdrop of my television interview, the shears a cold, heavy weight in my hand. The simple, methodical act of snipping away the dead blooms was a meditation, a way to focus my mind and still the frantic beating of my heart. I could feel the unseen eyes of Rob's team on me, a network of protection hidden in the encroaching darkness. I had the panic button in my pocket, a smooth, cool stone of reassurance. But I was the one standing in the open. I was the one on the front line. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The sky deepened from purple to a velvety, star-pricked black. A part of me began to relax, to think that maybe he wasn't coming. Maybe the intel was wrong. Maybe for all his cunning, he had sensed the trap and had simply disappeared back into the shadows. I felt a wave of both profound relief and a strange, sharp disappointment. I wanted this to be over. I snipped one last dead rose, my movements growing more confident, my guard beginning to lower. And that's when he appeared. He didn't come from the street, where the police were waiting. He emerged as if from the earth itself, from a thick, overgrown hedge that bordered an abandoned lot next to the garden. One moment, there was nothing but shadows. The next, he was there, standing not 20 feet away. He was a nightmare brought to life. The well-dressed, handsome man I had once married was gone, replaced by a gaunt, disheveled creature. His eyes were wild, burning with a feverish, obsessive hatred in the dim light. He took a step toward me, a slow, deliberate movement. "You look beautiful, Whitney," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that scraped against my soul. "So happy. So peaceful." He took another step. "You didn't really think I would let you keep that, did you?" The old Whitney would have screamed. She would have frozen in pure animal terror. The woman he had spent 38 years creating would have collapsed. But he was too late. That woman was dead. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I slowly stood up to my full height, the garden shears held loosely at my side. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hand was steady. I looked him directly in his wild, hateful eyes. "It's over, Marcus," I said, and I was distantly surprised by the calm, steady strength in my own voice. "You have no power here. You have no power over me anymore." His face twisted, the predatory smile faltering, replaced by a look of pure, baffled rage. This was not the reaction he had planned for. He had come to see me crumble, to feast on my terror. My defiance was a language he didn't understand, and it enraged him. "I will always have power over you," he roared, and he lunged. In that split second, as his body launched toward me through the dark, my thumb found the panic button in my pocket and pressed it hard. He was on me in an instant, his hands grabbing my arms, his face contorted into a mask of pure animal fury. The shears clattered to the ground. He was trying to drag me back toward the shadows, back toward the hedge, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. I fought back, kicking, twisting, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and righteous anger. And then the world exploded. Brilliant, blinding floodlights erupted from all sides, turning the night into a harsh, artificial day. The air was filled with the thunder of shouted commands. LAPD, get down on the ground. Now. Marcus froze, momentarily blinded and confused, a cornered animal caught in the glare of a dozen headlights. He was surrounded. The trap had closed. He looked from the armed officers emerging from the shadows to me, and his eyes filled with a new, desperate kind of hatred. He wasn't done. In one last, desperate act of possession, his arm snaked around my neck, pulling me tight against him. I felt something cold and sharp press against the soft skin of my throat. A knife. He began to back away, dragging me with him, a human shield between him and the circle of closing police. I could see Rob at the edge of the light, his face a mask of pure, helpless fury, his hand on a weapon he could not use. The trap had worked perfectly. The monster was caught. But as I felt the cold, sharp edge of the blade press against my throat, I realized the hunt wasn't over. My own survival had just become the price of victory. The world became a tunnel of blinding light and noise. I was the center of a terrible, silent storm, the cold steel of Marcus's knife a chilling anchor to reality. His arm was a band of iron around my chest, and his hot, sour breath was on my cheek. He smelled of sweat and a desperation so profound it had its own foul odor. "Everybody back up," he screamed, his voice cracking with a frantic, wild energy. "I swear to God, I'll kill her." "Everybody back!" I could see Rob, his face a pale, agonized mask at the edge of the police perimeter. He had his hands up in a placating gesture, but his eyes were locked on me, and in them I saw a universe of love and helpless fury. The professional detective was gone, replaced by a husband watching his wife being held at knife point. "Okay, Marcus, okay," Rob's voice called out, calm and steady, a practiced negotiator's cadence. "Let's just talk about this. Nobody needs to get hurt, just let her go and we can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Marcus shrieked, his spittle hitting my cheek. "She's mine. She's always been mine. Look at what you made me do, Whitney." "You made me do this?" He began to drag me backward, toward the dark hedge he had emerged from, and as he rambled, a torrent of pathetic, self-pitying justifications pouring out of him, something inside me shifted. The primal animal fear was still there, a cold current in my veins. But listening to him, to the whining, pathetic tone of a man who had lost everything and could only blame the world, I realized something profound. He was weak. For 38 years, his power had been derived from my fear. His rage was the storm, and I was a little boat tossed about on its waves. He had seemed like a giant, a force of nature. But here, in the harsh, unforgiving glare of the police floodlights, with his back against the wall, he was just a man. A sad, broken, and pathetic man, whose only remaining tool was a blade held to the throat of a woman who was no longer afraid of him. I looked past his contorted face and met Rob's gaze across the lawn. I saw the life that was waiting for me. A life of peace, of respect, of a quiet and gentle love. And then I looked back at the monster holding me, the ghost of a past that refused to stay buried. The rage I had felt earlier returned, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic thing. It was a cold, sharp, and perfectly focused point of light. He was still ranting, his grip tightening. "You thought you could just leave me? Erase me? Start a new life with this cop?" I had to act. I could not be the damsel in distress, the victim who was saved. My freedom, if it was to be real, had to be earned. It had to be taken. I used the only weapon I had left, my voice, and my knowledge of his pathetic, fragile ego. "Is this it, Marcus?" I said, my voice not a scream or a whisper, but a low, conversational, and utterly dismissive tone. The sudden change in my demeanor made him pause his rant. "Is this all you have left?" I continued, the words like ice. "A knife in the dark and a woman to hide behind? After all your big talk, all your power plays, you're just a sad, pathetic coward who couldn't stand to see me happy. You didn't just lose me, Marcus, you lost. Period. You're nothing." I felt his body jolt as if I had hit him with a taser. My contempt, my refusal to be his victim, was a blow he could not withstand. His ego, the only thing holding him together, shattered. "I'll show you nothing," he screamed, his voice breaking, and for a fraction of a second his rage overrode his strategy. His arm loosened its iron grip as he shifted his weight to scream in my face. It was the only opening I would get. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought the heel of my shoe down as hard as I possibly could on the delicate bones of his instep. He roared in pain, his grip faltering for another split second. It was all I needed. I threw my head back, smashing the back of my skull into his nose with a sickening crunch. His hold broke completely. I threw myself forward and to the side, tumbling onto the grass away from the blade. The world erupted. The sound of a taser crackled through the air and Marcus's body convulsed and dropped to the ground. In an instant, a swarm of dark uniforms was on him, and the monster who had haunted my life was finally and completely caged. I lay on the grass, my breath coming in ragged, gulping sobs, the scent of crushed roses and damp earth filling my senses. Strong hands were on me, Rob's hands pulling me up and into his arms, his face buried in my hair. The danger was over. I looked over his shoulder and saw them dragging Marcus away, a pathetic, struggling figure screaming my name, his face a bloody mess. But his voice, the voice that had been the soundtrack to my nightmares for decades, had no power anymore. The monster was gone, dragged away into the darkness he had come from. And as I stood there in the ruins of my wedding day, wrapped in the arms of the man I loved, I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even a survivor. For the first time in my life, I was simply and completely free. The days that followed the arrest were a strange mix of exhaustion and profound, bone-deep peace. The storm had passed. The monster was in a cage, where he could no longer hurt anyone. Our house, which had been a fortress and a safe house, slowly began to feel like a home again. Chloe stayed with us for another week, the three of us forming a small, tight-knit tribe, healing from the battle we had just endured. The security cameras still blinked their silent, watchful red lights, but their presence no longer felt like a necessity. It felt like a scar, a reminder of the fight we had won. The story of the dramatic standoff at the community garden became a minor sensation in the local news. They painted a picture of a heroic retired detective and his brave new wife, cornering a dangerous stalker. Reporters camped out on our street for a day or two, but Rob, with his years of experience managing the press, handled them with a firm, polite no comment that eventually made them go away. He built a wall of privacy around me, giving me the space I needed to finally, truly breathe. The support from our new community was a revelation. Friends from the garden, Rob's old colleagues, neighbors we barely knew, they all rallied around us. They brought food, they offered to stand guard, they sent cards filled with words of support. In New York, Marcus had isolated me, making me feel as though my suffering was a shameful secret. Here, in this new life, I was surrounded by a compassionate strength that refused to let me feel alone. The final legal chapter of my life with Marcus took place not in a chaotic police station, but in the calm, quiet office of the deputy district attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s. Rob and I sat across from her as she laid out the case. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony of dozens of police officers, the physical evidence from the threatening package, the multiple witnesses to the wedding attack, and the attempted break-in at Chloe's apartment. Marcus was facing a litany of charges that would ensure he would spend the rest of his miserable life in prison. He is a textbook case of malignant narcissism and obsessive control, the DA said, looking at me with a deep professional empathy. You are very, very brave, Mrs. Matthews. We have everything we need from your initial statements. But he will have a preliminary hearing next month. You are not required to be there, but he will be. I had to make a choice. I could let the system handle it from here, let the lawyers and the judges do their work while I disappeared into my new, peaceful life. That was the safe option. That was what the old Whitney would have done. A few days later, Rob, Chloe, and I went back to the community garden. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon. The police tape was gone, but the signs of the struggle remained. Trampled flower beds, patches of torn-up grass. We didn't just visit. We brought gardening tools. We worked. We replanted the roses that had been crushed. We turned the soil. We brought life back to the place that had been the stage for so much potential death. It was a quiet, symbolic act of reclaiming our peace, of refusing to let him hold even a single inch of our new territory. As I worked the rich, dark earth with my hands, I felt a sense of clarity. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, calm strength. That evening, Rob and I sat on our patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. Our wedding had been a disaster, but the marriage that followed was forged in the heat of that battle, creating a bond that was stronger than any vow. We held hands, finally able to talk about a future that wasn't overshadowed by a threat. We planned a real honeymoon, a quiet trip up the coast. We talked about what color to paint the guest room. Simple, normal, beautiful things. The next week, a certified letter arrived. It was from the public defender's office. It was a formal notification for the preliminary hearing. I held the paper in my hand. The stark black and white text, a final pathetic attempt by Marcus to insert himself into my life. Rob came and stood behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. You don't have to go, you know, he said softly. The DA has more than enough. You never have to see his face again if you don't want to. I leaned back against his solid, comforting strength and looked at the date on the summons. For 38 years, I had avoided confrontation with Marcus. I had run. I had hidden. I had made myself small to avoid his rage, but I wasn't that woman anymore. No, I said, a look of calm, unshakable resolve on my face. I'm not going because I have to. I'm going because I want to. I turned in his arms to face him. I need to look him in the eye, not as his victim, not as his ex-wife, but as the woman who put him away. I have one last thing I need him to see. The hearing was no longer his final stage for terror. It was going to be mine for my final act of liberation. The day of the preliminary hearing was bright and clear. I chose my outfit with the care of a general dressing for a treaty signing. I did not wear black, the color of mourning. I wore a simple, elegant dress in a shade of deep royal blue, the color of confidence and calm waters. As Rob, Chloe, and I walked up the steps of the courthouse, we were not a family in crisis. We were a united, unbreakable front. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, all polished wood and harsh, fluorescent lighting. We sat in the front row. I could feel Rob's solid presence beside me, a silent, unwavering source of strength. We were not there as victims. We were there as witnesses to the final, pathetic chapter of a story that was now, blessedly, over. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. The man who had haunted my nightmares for decades, the monster who had appeared in my garden with wild, burning eyes, was gone. In his place was a stooped, sallow-faced man in an orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists were shackled. Under the unforgiving lights of the courtroom, stripped of his power to intimidate and terrorize, he looked exactly like what he was, a weak, pathetic, and deeply broken man. The proceedings were a dry, procedural affair. The district attorney listed the charges in a calm, flat voice: assault, trespassing, making criminal threats, attempted kidnapping. The evidence was laid out. Item by item, it was an open and shut case. Throughout it all, Marcus stared at the floor, a sullen, defeated slump in his shoulders. Then he lifted his head. His eyes scanned the room and found me. I felt Rob's hand instinctively tighten on mine. Marcus's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a flicker of the old familiar malice. He was looking for his last meal. He was looking for a sign of my fear. A single tear, a tremor of weakness to feed his starving ego. He wanted to know that even in chains, he still had power over me. I did not look away. I did not flinch. I held his gaze and I let him see absolutely nothing. No fear, no anger, no hatred. I simply looked at him as you would look at a stranger, a piece of forgotten history, an object that no longer held any meaning or relevance in your world. I gave him the devastating final insult of my complete and utter indifference. His face contorted. He saw my peace, my strength, my freedom, and he could not bear it. His mask of sullen defeat shattered, and the impotent rage beneath boiled over. He lunged forward in his chair, a string of vile, hateful curses spewing from his mouth directed at me. The bailiffs were on him in an instant, restraining him, silencing him as he fought like a caged animal. As they dragged him, still screaming my name from the courtroom, I did not watch him go. I turned to Rob and I smiled. It was over. A year has passed since that day. Marcus, as predicted, was found guilty on all charges and is now serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison, a place where he will never harm another woman again. Rob and I had another wedding. There was no big party, no crowd of guests. One evening at sunset, we walked down to the beach with Chloe as our only witness, and we renewed our vows. As the waves crashed on the shore and the sky turned a brilliant orange, he kissed me, and this time there were no interruptions. It was a quiet, perfect, and sacred moment that sealed the beginning of our real life together. My art, the passion I had rediscovered in my new life, has blossomed. My paintings, once filled with muted tones and hidden shadows, are now an explosion of vibrant, joyful color. A local gallery took an interest, and to my unending surprise, people wanted to buy them. My pain, it turned out, when filtered through the lens of survival and hope, had been transformed into something another person might find beautiful. Our house is no longer a fortress. It is a home filled with the laughter of friends, the smell of Rob's incredible cooking, and the peaceful, happy clutter of a shared life. The security system is still there, a quiet reminder of the battle we won, but it no longer feels like a necessity. This afternoon, I am back in the community garden. It holds no ghosts for me. It is my sanctuary. I am teaching a small group of children from the neighborhood how to plant seedlings, their small hands covered in rich, dark earth. Rob is sitting on a nearby bench watching me, a look of such profound and gentle love on his face that it still makes my heart skip a beat. I look at these children, at the tiny, hopeful green shoots in their hands, and I feel a sense of peace that is absolute. I am no longer a victim. I am no longer a survivor. I am a gardener, a painter, a wife, a woman who understands that sometimes you must pull the most stubborn and toxic of weeds, right down to the root, so that something new and beautiful can finally have the space to grow in the sun.